Hi, welcome to The Pipeline. I'm Derek Fildebrand, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is July 21st, 2021. I'm joined today by Western Standard News editor Dave Naylor. Dave, how are you feeling?
Well, you know, I'm battling this BC smoke. Feels like I've already smoked a pack today, but other than that, doing great.
I think BC would be a little more upset than we are if we were blowing this much smoke at them.
Well, you know, it's almost an annual event now, isn't it?
It is just kind of a part of the weather plan. We've got about a month of fall, most of the year's winter, brief spring, a really brief summer, and then smoke season.
Yes.
Yeah. Corey Morgan, host of the Corey Morgan Show and Alberta political columnist. How you doing, Corey?
Very good.
Well, today we've got a great show. We've got a federal election almost certainly coming. We're going to be talking about how the different major parties look going into that. We've got dueling, not-so-balanced budget plans from Justin Trudeau versus Aaron O'Toole. One is asking for a political lifetime to balance the budget. The other one is asking for an actual full-length human lifetime to balance the budget. Speaking of Prime Minister Blackface, he'll be doing participating in a video or of some sorts. Dave will have the details on that. About on African Canadians, he is one himself. He really speaks from personal experience. This is what they call lived experience. Justin Trudeau has been black himself multiple times in the past, so we'll be speaking about his in-depth knowledge on the subject. And speaking of legacies, his own father's legacy continuing on well in the federal government. Canada's federal government praising Cuba's communists. They're only cracking down because of COVID, and people get crazy from COVID. You gotta keep those people in line. So Canada praising Cuba's commies, and so we'll be talking about that and how Canada's been a beacon for freedom in the world. Along those lines. Okay, so we've got, before we get started, of course, we want to thank all of our Western Standard members for your continued support. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. You can try a Western Standard membership for 15 days for free. It's just $10 a month or $99 a year if you sign up with us right now. I think it's a good deal. I don't know about you guys. I think it's money well spent to support Western bailout-free, non-government funded media. I think we give you a lot of content that really matters to Westerners. Today's show is sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights works extremely hard to defend. We have an overlay that we need coming from the background here. The Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights is over top of Dave's head right now, which is wonderful. They work very hard to support your right to own, use firearms in Canada, protecting you from government overreach. It's a particularly important organization right now while your firearm rights are under assault, and not assault in the liberal sense of the word. We really mean they're trying to actually assault it. Not just that it looks scary, but it is scary. Go to firearmrights.ca to learn more. Click Why Join Us to learn more about why you should become a member and support the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. That's singular, firearmrights.ca. Click, what is it to click on again?
Why join us?
Why join us? That's it.
They give you a lot more detail once you hit on that. They make a good case.
Yeah. There we go. Today's show is also sponsored by Resistance Coffee. Resistance Coffee is a kick-ass brand of coffee. A lot of coffee brands take a portion of their proceeds and pass it on to organizations trying to take away things like your firearm rights. Resistance Coffee does quite the opposite. They take a portion of their proceeds and pass it on to organizations that are fighting for your constitutional freedoms. Things like freedom of speech and assembly that have come under attack during COVID lockdowns. Things like your firearm rights, which are always under attack, no matter who's in charge, sometimes just more than others. So it's they're a fantastic coffee company. Corey drinks them. He drinks Liberal Tears pretty much every morning.
Yeah, I printed out. I'm on the defund the CBC package now,
there
which
you
is
go.
still quite satisfying as well.
What does defund the CBC taste like? Sweet?
It is sweet, you know. I mean, especially once we get there, so you don't need as much sugar in it. It's already got a fine flavor going down.
Yeah. Well, go to resistancecoffee.com and use promotion code Western Standard to get 10% off your first order. Again, you go to resistancecoffee.com and use one word, Western Standard, no caps, just all in one word, and you'll get 10% off your first order. It's a good deal. Well, let's turn our attention to Canadian federal politics. I like to ignore them as much as I possibly can. But, you know, Ottawa still exists, and we have to deal with it. Federal election coming. We've got different polls out. I know there's a Nanos one we just briefly saw before we came on, but there's some other ones that you've reported on, Dave. Why don't you give us the skinny?
Sure, it's the worst kept secret in the country that we're bound for an election very soon. Liberal staffers have been told to wrap up all their holidays by August 15th. So that's leading all signs to point to a election around the end of September. Since Erin O'Toole took over the Conservative Party, they've been in the tank poll-wise, trailing the Liberals by sometimes more than 10 figures, basically led by O'Toole's personal unpopularity, Derek. But now there's a poll out that we reported on this week from Angus Reid. Showing that they're in a statistical tie. The hatred for O'Toole has grown to an all-time high. 58% of people don't like him, which is a huge figure. But statistically, they're now tied with the Liberals. And the pollsters say the reason for this is because COVID is basically over and done with in people's minds. They gave Trudeau a passing grade somehow for his actions during the COVID pandemic. People sense that it's over now, and they want to move on to the economy and health. And I think that's where people are taking a step backwards and saying, you know, taking a close look at what the Liberals are offering, and that's probably the reason behind the Tory rise in the polls. Whether they stay that way remains to be seen.
Corey, O'Toole's been behind in the polls since the very first day he became leader. He never even got that bounce that you normally get when the party has a new leader. People are all excited. They don't know how bad the leader actually is yet. They're projecting good things onto them. He never got that bump. There's now 2 polls showing he's actually within striking distance, although with inefficient seat count, with concentration in the West, that still probably translates to getting their asses kicked. Remember last time Andrew Scheer got, I don't know, what was it, 35% or so, something in that neighborhood, beat the Liberals handedly in the popular vote, but they still got trounced in the seat count because all their support's concentrated in the West, and also the West gets less seats relative to its population anyway. But then we've also got Nanos out showing that, I mean, the Tories are going to get absolutely trounced. They're going to lose seats. Trudeau's going to get a thumping majority. I don't know. What's your sense? Which side is right, and do you see much movement as we get into a campaign?
Well, possibly a bit of both is right. I mean, perhaps that popular vote is rising up. Some of the undecideds in the West are saying yes. But as you said, it's all about where your votes are concentrated. I mean, you could have 90% support in the West. It doesn't matter. If you don't win Ontario and Quebec, you're not going to form government, and that's been the ongoing issue. Because that recent one, the Nanos one, I believe, that was more of the breakdown, looking at the regional seats and so on. So seat projections, which look dire and terrible with the way that vote concentration's going. I mean, it's still any sort of movement on the part of the Conservatives going up. I mean, he's, as you said, since he's winning the leadership, he's been just stagnant and sitting there. If they can show a little bit of momentum, I mean, they've got to welcome it. There's no doubt there's an election coming within the next couple of months. He doesn't have much time to hustle and try and turn that around. But election periods are volatile. I mean, you know, it's just prior to your time and getting way back to Kim Campbell's doomed run. She came in with high in the polls and coming off of the highest majority in Canadian history, I believe, and finished with 2 seats by the time that campaign was done. So things can change. We'll see.
Well, I mean, she did have a pretty good polls when she became leader, but she had taken over from Brian Mulroney.
Oh, it was an exceptional circumstance.
And he was in the single digits. People had just said, new leader, let's give him a chance.
Yeah.
That bump in the polls she had was about a couple of weeks, and then she went from probably on our way to at least the minority government, to the biggest defeat of any party in the history of the democratic world.
And the main point is just that during that campaign period, though, a lot of stuff can change really radically.
Yeah, and don't forget the debates too. I'm sure we'll have those, which are always sort of not great in Canada because there's too many people on stage. But you know, election gaffes, social media, you know, plenty of time for both parties to screw up.
You know, O'Toole could get caught wearing blackface, and he'll win. He'll become prime minister.
That
Like
could be the case.
That's a prerequisite now.
I suspect the blackface, there's a certain side of the spectrum you got to be on to get away with that one, apparently.
Well, you know, that's just a heck of a segue. We're going to come to the balanced budgets in a bit, but let's just segue from there. Prime Minister Blackface is going to be doing some kind of video. Dave, you've got a story on this. Why don't you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, it's a hypocrisy with a capital H, Derek. We'll all remember Trudeau appearing at least 3 times in blackface. He says he can't remember how many times he did it. But when it was finally exposed...
That's code for more than 3 times.
I think it's code for more than 3 times. But at the end of it, he apologized, said he didn't know he was being stupid. He was just a young drama teacher, and said it's very bad to do. So now, just before the election, Heritage Canada's come out with a $110,000 YouTube video on slavery, set to go August 4th, live on your TVs. It's a documentary basically focusing on the anniversary of the British abolition of slavery, and our favorite blackface prime minister actually has the gall to be the narrator.
I think he's going to try and do a Morgan Freeman voice.
Ooh, that would be good. That would be good.
Or maybe affect an urban black accent. Oh man, I'm just envisioning.
So I mean, come on, you know that Monday Night Football thing where they say, "Come on, man, this is, come on, man." Trudeau narrating a video on slavery, Mr. Blackface himself. I don't know.
He's been black many times
He has.
before.
He understands how that ethnic group is, you know, certainly suffering from persecution. That's for sure.
Corey, good idea. Okay. You're Trudeau's advisor. You're the next Gerald Butts, and you're sitting around, and this idea comes across the desk, and I'm Justin Trudeau. I'm looking at you in blackface, and I say, good idea or bad idea? Should I do this documentary?
Justin, I got somewhere you got to go on that day. I'm sorry, it's all tied up. We're going to find somebody from the caucus who could speak perhaps a little better to this. You know, we've got a bridesmaids gathering you can go kiss or something, and just get Justin away from that. I mean, this is just brutal, but I mean, he's the epitome of privilege. I mean, you know, he was a trust fund baby. His father was the prime minister, and he can't help that. That's fair enough. You're born into it, but I mean, that's what led to his non-thinking of making a parlor trick out of dressing in blackface, and to put that imbecile on to speak to slavery when he's had a life of such coddled luxury. He's just the last person in this country who should be speaking to it. So carry on, Liberals, carry on.
Dave, I don't know what more we can say. But
You're speechless. I've never seen you this speechless about a topic before.
it's rare. So he's narrating this thing?
He is the narrator.
He's the narrator.
It'll be his sultry tones that you hear talking about the history of slavery.
Okay.
You know, let's be fair. Maybe he's going to use it as an educational experience, and you know, that might prevent him from doing blackface in the future.
Well, this is also, there's actually a bit of an abuse of power in this that hasn't really been picked up on as an angle. Heritage Canada is a department. It is not a political arm of the government, in theory at least. It's not the minister's office. It's a department, and it's when it puts out material, it's supposed to be, you know, I remember remember the Heritage Minutes?
Yes.
And that was the department. I mean, some of them were really crappy and hokey, but some of them were pretty good. I remember them as part of our heritage. And there's a couple, I think, that we should restart them. Like one, I think, would be Jean Chrétien choking that guy.
The Shawinigan Strangler. That was
The
beautiful.
Shawinigan Shake.
That was the high point of
I
his
thought
prime
that was
minister.
great. Yeah, everybody liked him for that. The guy deserved to be choked. You know, is Gretchen going to have to choke us? I'm not going to say the rest.
But you do make a good point. This is coming out right before the election. Right
Yeah.
before. August 4th is the world premiere on YouTube. Make sure you got your popcorn ready. August 4th. You know, as we talked about earlier, August 15th is the holiday deadline for the Liberals to go into the election. So it'll be within weeks of the.
Yeah.
So what is the Heritage Department doing? Basically giving the Prime Minister a free platform. You know, certainly questions should be asked.
I'm told that my sound is still not very good, so the man with the soundboard at the back, if you can make this sound less terrible. Okay, well, I don't know. We could just make fun of this all day, but I don't think I have anything else, you know, thoughtful to add.
Like I said, it's just so striking. It really is of the cancel culture we're in today, though. I mean, you know, getting a little beyond the humor aspect of it. Anybody else? I mean, in that role,
Literally anyone.
multiple times. You know, I mean, lied about it the first time he was caught and said that's it, that's all, until two more popped up. Well, okay, except for those ones. So I mean, when we're talking about the polls turning and that, and him doing something that seems so counterintuitive and stupid as have him do a video on slavery, it might work for them.
No, you know, maybe it's not blackface, it's transracial. And he identifies as black some days. So, I mean, that's his decision, and we have to respect him.
Who are we to mock him for that decision?
We have to respect his decision to identify as black when he gets drunk.
Well, and you know, I did put a little revealing picture out on Twitter the other day of myself dressing for a costume party.
A loincloth.
Yes.
It was in a loincloth, ladies and gentlemen.
No one.
Parental advisory.
No one go to Corey's Twitter account. Nothing good can come from that.
No, probably not. But most of what my point was making was I did stupid, odd, bizarre thing. Well, I still do occasionally, but not like that one. And back in my drinking and youthful days. But even then, never for a second did I think, I'm going to get some shoe polish and blacken up for this. It didn't, even in the early 90s, you know, that excuse with Trudeau, like what, blackface was considered bad in the 60s for crying out loud, much less in the 2000s. Yet again, the black, he does have Teflon because the makeup slid off and so did the stigma, and I don't get it.
And also, he was not some stupid teenager. He was a teacher.
Yeah.
He was a teacher at multiple schools while he's doing blackface. This is a regular thing he would do. We all knew, like, I grew up, you know, I was a kid in the 90s and the early 2000s for high school. It would have never dawned on me. And I did all sorts of, I dressed up as Colonel Gaddafi for Halloween. But I didn't darken myself. I wore a wig.
Yeah.
But, you know, it would never occur to me.
It's just a line you just don't do. It's
It's actually a subculture of certain elites in overall North America. And it particularly applies just, I think, within kind of liberal, bougie circles where, oh, I can do it because I can't possibly be racist because I'm a liberal.
Well, it gets back to that privilege, that world he's in, that separate one. But the fact that the electorate keeps giving him a pass on it, as I said, maybe he's right. That's distressing.
All right. Well, let's come back to other, I guess, more substantive federal issues. Trudeau and O'Toole, they're dueling balanced budget plans. Trudeau has no plan whatsoever. I mean, it's not even, he doesn't even have a theoretical promise. It's just not at all. Parliamentary budget officer today, well, let's start with Trudeau's plan and then we'll go to O'Toole's. Why don't you tell us what the parliamentary budget officer said about Trudeau's plan?
Yeah, this comes from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and our friend Franco Terrazana. They crunched the numbers from recent PBO releases and said the budget will not be balanced until 2070. 2070.
Oh, I thought he said 70 years.
No, 2070, but it's 50 years.
Okay.
So after everybody on this panel will be well dead, and probably a lot of our listeners. So that's if the Liberals continue their current way. You'll remember Trudeau's election promises that the budget will balance itself. You know, no more need to get into that mockery again because It's obviously that they don't. They've been on a spending spree through COVID. We now owe more than $1 trillion. The CTF figures by 2070, the interest just on what we owe will be $3 trillion a year. An incredible figure. I mean, just imagine how many schools and nurses and doctors and police officers that could fund. So your other alternative is Aaron O'Toole and the Conservative Party, who says we don't need 2070, we can do it by 2030. We can do it in just a decade. And as you'll explain, Derek, a decade is basically 3 majority Conservative terms, which hasn't happened in a long time. So it's, you know, when it actually happens, it's anybody's guess, but we'll long be dead and our grandchildren may be middle-aged.
Yeah, so, okay, Trudeau's not even got a theoretical plan. It's just kind of out there. And that's assuming they don't increase spending any further. That's just based on current spending. That's based on current. And, you know, if you believe that Justin Trudeau is not going to increase spending any further, I got a bridge to sell you. Or I can try to convince you of the Conservative plan. So Aaron O'Toole says, I'm a tough fiscal conservative. I'm true blue, but I need 10 years to balance the budget. 10 years. So if you have a majority government, you get 4 years. That is 3 majority governments. The last Conservative leader in Canada to have 3 consecutive majority governments, or 3 majority governments, period, not even consecutive, was Sir John A. Macdonald. There is not a person alive on the planet today who is alive while Prime Minister. So the chances of Aaron O'Toole is going to just light everyone on fire with his incredible charisma and win a smashing majority government. And then he's going to do it again, and then he's going to do it again, and he's going to balance the budget. This is the same kind of thing you saw from Pierre Trudeau used to say the same thing. Oh, well, you know, things have happened. It's tough. It's not my fault. I'm going to balance the budget, and he'll have some projection. At the end of the projection, they show this mythical balanced budget, and then every year it goes out, out. Trudeau the first never got to a balanced budget. Brian Mulroney did the exact same thing. He paid more lip service to it than Pierre Trudeau because, you know, he's a conservative, pay lip service to it at least. He had 2 majority, he promised to do it in 1 term. He didn't even do it with 2. And his second term, he extended actually to 5 years, and kind of an extraordinary move that they have the constitutional right to do, even though it's not usual. You know, here in Alberta, you had Ed Stelmach with his balanced budget plan. He never got there. Alison Redford with hers. She never got there. Prentice definitely never got there. He was gone pretty quick. Rachel Notley never got there. Jason Kenney, it remains to be seen. I mean, oil's doing really good. I mean, it's possible maybe he does it.
But he's running the biggest deficits in Alberta history.
There's never been bigger provincial deficits in Alberta's history by far. But I mean, maybe oil bills met at the end of the day. Hard to say so far. But this is a very tried and true strategy where you pay lip service to a balanced budget, and you never actually get there because it's so far out. But you could tell people I have a plan. Corey, what do you think the chances are that Aaron O'Toole can win 3 majority governments?
I doubt he's going to win 1 minority government. But I mean, again, look at the spot he's in. You know, high spending, lack of foresight is in. I mean, that's what people want to hear. They want sunshine blown up their butts. If he came out with an austerity campaign to say, you know what, because you know what nobody's talking about is cutting. Nobody's talking about cutting. At best, when they're talking about pursuing a balanced budget, they're trying to find more revenue tools. They're talking about the other areas where they're going to tax. Why are they doing it? Because their focus groups are saying that's what people want. They're doing it because they see if he came out and said, I'm going to cut this, and this, he's not going to get elected. And I'm afraid it's going to take a wake-up call on the part of the electorate more than on the politicians before this changes. You know, Greece figured it out the hard way. And I'm afraid we're on the same track. As you said, even if we got the Conservatives, it's just the same train. It's just going maybe a little slower. And eventually we've got to crash. I mean, it's just math. But
you know, and we crashed in the early 90s when, I mean, it pains me to say this. It's not something I want to say, but Jean Chrétien was the best fiscal conservative Prime Minister in Canada since Sir Wilfrid Laurier. And that pains me to say it, because I don't like Jean Chrétien. I remember, you know, where I grew up, we were supposed to hate him. We didn't like him. But, I mean, God, I would take him over Stephen Harper when it comes to budgets.
Well, the thing that was that also you were coming off of the 80s and into the 90s, and you had those double-digit interest rates. Like the amount of interest we were paying on debt, even the most lay person in economics could look and say, "Holy cow! Look at all this money going out." So that's where suddenly Mike Harris and Ralph Klein, and I mean, it was to finally balance your budget. Romano.
Romano in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, so
NDP.
we aren't feeling it yet. It's not until the electorate really feels that kick in the butt, unfortunately, before we see the will to change, and I don't see it yet.
But one of the big changes in the early 90s was, yes, the creditors were calling their loans in and we were facing a genuine crisis. But you also had a change in political climate. You had some people with balls. You had Preston Manning and the Reform Party. You had groups like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and the Fraser Institute were really catching on with people breaking through. And you had political leadership, as I said, with Preston Manning, getting people engaged. And Manning never got to be prime minister, but a lot of his agenda was at least partially enacted.
He was definitely influencing
Yeah.
the politics in Ottawa.
And Aaron O'Toole does not seem to have the stones to stand by anything conservative to bring. His goal is to chase the center, and that almost always fails because everyone else, because it's relative.
If that worked, we'd have had an Alberta Party government 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I guess one of the questions is, what are the Liberals going to do about it? The only thing they can do is raise taxes. So your income tax is likely to get raised, and then they're talking about a wealth tax. Okay, well that doesn't affect anybody at this table. You got to be over, making over $5 million, but the wealthy won't be.
yourself.
Yeah, well, we can live in hope. But the inheritance tax, that could be huge. When they start taxing inheritances, I think that's when Corey says the electorate's going to start to stand up and take notice. Equity tax. You've worked your entire life to get a house, and it's doubled in value, and the feds are going to come in and take 50% of that. That's going to get people upset. So again, we're moving slowly, inexorably, whatever the word is, towards desperate times. And when desperate times, there's going to be desperate measures. And these are all coming down the pipe, I think.
Good. Pamela Jones-Kenny says, correction over Harper, are you nuts? I hate to say it. I voted for Stephen Harper. I never voted for Jean Chrétien. That's because I was in high school and elementary school while he was prime minister. But you got to go based on the facts. Jean Chrétien massively cut spending in the 1995 budget, took Canada's deficits from Banana Republic Greece level to massive surpluses. And he did it without very significant increases in taxes. And I think he was an unethical prime minister. I think he was terrible in all sorts of areas. But where he got it right was with the budget and his finance minister at the time, Paul Martin. And I hate to say it, because Stephen Harper was the great hope for many of us who believe in these things. And Stephen Harper, until Justin Trudeau, ran the biggest deficits in Canadian history. Stephen Harper borrowed more money to fight the 2009 recession than we borrowed to fight the First and Second World Wars combined. So Stephen Harper, I don't necessarily blame him. I just don't think you can have a conservative government in Canada. I think the East is so fundamentally locked into their worldview of government that's a necessary thing to win and retain power. I don't think you're actually going to. I don't think there is such a thing as a good federal government in Canada. It doesn't really exist. But I'd like the Conservatives to at least try. That's all I'm asking of O'Toole here, is that he at least tries. And just be honest. Don't tell us you have a balanced budget plan if you don't have a balanced budget plan. 10 years is even more ridiculous than, remember Justin Trudeau said when he was first in the campaign leading up to him being first elected Prime Minister 2015, he said, I'm just going to run a small temporary deficit. Well, that's a plan that if you believed, I got a bridge to sell you. And so equally, if you believe Aaron O'Toole's plan that he can do this in 10 years, well, you may as well voted for Trudeau as well. O'Toole's promise of 10 years is even more liberal than Justin Trudeau's promise of just a small little budget. Remember Stephen Harper making fun of him? Just a little tiny budget, a little deficit.
Don't forget that O'Toole also promised he'd never bring in a carbon tax.
Yeah.
And look where that's got us.
O'Toole is proposing a carbon tax that is even worse than Justin Trudeau's now. So, I mean, this is where I caution a lot of people. You can be conservative in your ideology or your worldview, but don't be unquestioningly conservative in how you vote. Only if you're conservative in your worldview, consider not voting conservative if they aren't being conservatives. Your party label does not define their beliefs. So I think it's important for conservative voters, conservative members out there to hold their own party accountable, hold their leaders accountable, and demand that they at least live up to the things they campaigned on.
Can we talk about something happier now, like communism?
Communism, but it's communism in the sun. I mean,
That is true. And you get free Medicare.
if I'm going to live in communism, I prefer Cuba over Siberia.
Good point.
I mean, not all communists are created equal. So, okay, yeah, let's go on. The Trudeaus, longtime fans and friends of the Castro communist regime in Cuba, the federal government's now issued a statement for its diplomats around the world. Dave, you've got the story. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's and don't forget that years ago Trudeau said he admired communism in China as his favorite government because they can get stuff done. So fast forward to 2021 when the Canadian diplomats put together a briefing paper for Foreign Minister Marc Garneau. There was to be a big communist congress in Cuba, so they were giving him the dope on that. And they praised Cuba to high heaven, saying they're starting to come around. They're offering greater free speech and and more social programs. And this was, of course, literally weeks before COVID came. And of course, everything went out the window with COVID and the communists. They're now rounding up people, throwing them in jail. Street protesters are being hauled in and jailed without trial. The internet is being shut down. Even Amnesty International is getting on their cases. But the diplomats say, well, we wrote this before COVID and COVID changed everything. But even without COVID, it was still a communist country. They're still limiting their citizens' freedoms, but that didn't stop Canadian diplomats from singing their praises.
It's not just the diplomats. I know what they call Global Affairs Canada, which we used to call Foreign Affairs, because we're so global here. We're it's very metropolitan, or what's the term? Anyway, it's the federal government's statement when these anti-communist protests broke out was hilarious. They never mentioned the word communism once. They didn't mention authoritarianism or totalitarianism. They just said the people of Cuba are just demanding more action on COVID.
They wanted food.
They wanted food and freedom.
Yeah.
Food and freedom is what they want. Not a mention of this. The Trudeau government's statement on it actually called for, quote, restraint on both sides, as if these protesters are holding the government hostage, that they're oppressing the poor government. I don't know. Corey, do you think there's any political hate that's going to come out of this? Or is it just kind of baked into the political price in Canada that the Liberals support the Cuban Communist Party? And
have. I mean, we've seen the pictures of Margaret and Justin and Fidel and whatever relationship they had, and Pierre.
You're not implying anything.
No, read in what you will. And Pierre, occasionally would pop down and such too. But I mean, that blind spot with communism, and it's repugnant. It's sickening. I mean, this is something. Cuba is one of the last bastions of a disgusting system that killed tens of millions of people throughout the 20th century. There should be absolutely no sugarcoating that gross, oppressive, totalitarian system. I mean, Castro pushed his people down. He was a dictator. He was a totalitarian. They had the people locked up. And I mean, again, for progressives, they weren't nice to gay people. Or look at some of the quotes of Che Guevara on black people. These guys were sick, nasty dictators. It's time to call them out. And the people are standing up. The people, the ones who have to live in it. And that's what really gets me. It's all these liberals, these ivory tower academics talking about how great Cuba is. But those damn ingrate citizens down there just don't seem to know how good they've got it, because they keep trying to swim to Miami on rickety rafts and such and get the hell away
Well,
from it.
there's tons of people getting on rafts, fleeing Miami, fleeing capitalism in Miami, going to Cuba.
Sure, how many people are crossing into North Korea as well? Like, we've got to call this out. Cuba has great potential, and the people there have had enough. We should be encouraging those protesters. They're not protesting against Cuba, they're protesting against the system and the government that has been holding them down for decades. And I understand you don't want to. You got diplomacy. You don't want to wade into the middle of that, but don't be unsupportive of the citizens standing up for themselves. They're standing up against a system that's done nothing but hurt them for generations, and it's just an embarrassment that Canada can't find its balls in the foreign service to call out on these badass countries out there.
Yeah. I've been planning a winter vacation. I haven't taken a winter vacation in some time. I was planning taking one this coming winter, and a lot of people tell me how beautiful Cuba is. I should check it out and to go. But part of me was slowly letting maybe a little bit of my guard down, thinking, well, the communists aren't going to go, make our peace with them and whatnot. But then you see this, and then you see the disgusting reaction of Canada's federal government. That is probably actually outside of Venezuela, Canada is the closest ally of Cuba's communist regime, after only Venezuela, which is also a communist regime. So, I can't do it. I mean, I'm going to go to its neighbor, probably Dominican or Mexico, something in the area. So
Colombia's been getting nicely.
Yeah. You know what? I'll go pretty much anywhere other than Siberia. I won't do Siberia. I don't want a gulag vacation. So yeah, if you're thinking about your winter vacation, please consider not giving your money to the communist regime in Cuba. It's just propping it up. If we want that government to fall, it can't be supported by an influx of largely Canadian money. Canada is by far the largest tourism source for Cuba, and that is their biggest source of revenue for that government, because apparently 100% taxes is not enough. So, well, let's wrap it up there on a nice sunny Cuban note. Guys, thanks for joining me today. And thank all of you watching or listening for joining. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandardonline.com/membership. You can become a member and try it free for 15 days before you get charged. If you don't like it in that time, I'm sure you're probably wrong, but if you do wish to cancel, you get your money back within 15 days. Today's show is sponsored by Resistance Coffee. Go to resistancecoffee.com and use promotion code Western Standard to get 10% off your first order. Resistance Coffee is a great company that donates a portion of its proceeds towards supporting organizations fighting for your constitutional freedoms, things like firearms rights, rights to freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of worship, rights that have come under extreme danger as governments in Canada have stripped those over the last year and a half. They've been taking some of that money, putting it into fighting for to defend those rights of yours. So go to resistancecoffee.com, use code Western Standard, that's all one word, no caps, get 10% off your first order. As well, today's show is also sponsored by the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The CCFR is an excellent organization defending your right to own, use, and enjoy firearms safely in Canada. Go to firearmrights.ca and click Why Join? Why Join? I don't know why I'm missing that lately. Click Why Join. Learn more about why you should become a member of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. It's money well spent. We'd encourage you to do it. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a great, I guess we're in the back end of July. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll actually be away next week on vacation. Corey will be stepping up, but I think we might have special guests, probably Mark Petroni at that time. I'm sure it'll be even better without me. Thank you very much for joining us. God bless.